The 1969 moon landing was humanity's greatest triumph, or its most elaborate lie. Some say the waving flag and missing stars are proof it was all a fake. Subscribe and hit the bell to uncover the shocking truth behind one of history's biggest conspiracies. Today's story is about one of the most famous events in all of human history, the Apollo moon landing. It happened on July 20th, 1969. This was the day that human beings first set foot on the moon. Can you even imagine that? At that time, an incredible 650 million people watched it happen live on their televisions. For the world, it felt like a miracle. All around the globe, families and friends gathered together, their eyes wide with wonder, waiting to see something that had only been a dream before. Neil Armstrong, an American astronaut, became the first human to walk on the lunar surface. His words from that day still echo through history. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But was the journey really that simple? Or was there a deeper, more complicated story behind this historic moment? Even today, so many years later, many people still question if the moon landing was real, or if it was all a fake, filmed in a secret studio. Why do some people say the American flag was moving, even though there is no wind on the moon? What about the strange shadows that you can see in the photographs? In our story today, I will tell you everything. We will talk about why the moon mission started, how dangerous it truly was, the people who risked their lives, and the mysteries that still surround the Apollo program. So please listen carefully. This isn't just a history lesson. It's a story filled with bravery, with secrets, and with science. And most importantly, you will get to practice your English listening skills while learning about one of the most amazing events in the world. By the end of this story, you will know why the moon landing happened, how it happened, and whether it was really fake or not. So are you ready? You might be wondering, why did America even want to go to the moon? The answer to that question is in something called the space race. The space race was a big competition between two very powerful countries, the United States of America, the USA, and the Soviet Union, the USSR, which we now know as Russia. This competition wasn't just about science. It was about power, and it was about pride. Let me explain. After World War II ended in 1945, both the USA and the Soviet Union wanted to prove that they were the most advanced and powerful country in the world. It wasn't just about building stronger weapons. It was also about exploring space. The Soviet Union shocked the world when they launched the first satellite called Sputnik 1 into space in 1957. Can you imagine that moment? It was the very first time that something made by humans was flying all the way around the Earth out in space. Then in 1961, the Soviets made history again. They sent the first human into space, a man named Yuri Gagarin. This was a huge embarrassment for the USA. They felt like they were losing the space race. People in America started to worry and question their leaders. Is the Soviet Union better than us, they asked. Are we falling behind? The pressure on the American government was enormous. So in 1961, President John F. Kennedy made a very bold promise. In a famous speech, he said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard." He promised the world that America would land a man on the moon and bring him back home safely before the end of the 1960s. At the time, this promise sounded almost impossible. Let me tell you why. Back then, there were no smartphones, no internet, and no GPS like we have today. The computers they used were incredibly basic. They had less power than the phone you are probably using to listen to this story right now. Yet President Kennedy promised something the world had never seen before, sending a human to the moon, a place that is 384,000 kilometers away from Earth. It was a race against time. To keep Kennedy's promise, NASA, the American space agency, created the Apollo program. It was named after Apollo, the Greek god of the sun. But I have to tell you, the Apollo program was not a smooth journey. From 1961 to 1966, NASA tested many rockets, but most of them failed. In 1963, they tested the Saturn I rocket. It was an unmanned test, which means no humans were inside. It was just to see if the rocket could fly. It worked, but only after many failures. Then came the Apollo 1 mission in 1967, and with it a moment of terrible tragedy. 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, were inside their spacecraft on the ground preparing for a routine test. Suddenly, a fire broke out inside the capsule. They couldn't escape in time, and all 3 astronauts died. The world was heartbroken. People started to ask difficult questions. Is going to the moon too dangerous? Should we stop this mission? But NASA didn't give up. Instead of stopping, they worked even harder. They improved the spacecraft, they fixed the mistakes, and they kept pushing forward. From 1968 to 1969, NASA sent several more unmanned missions without any people inside to test everything. After years of hard work, failures, and sacrifices, NASA was finally ready. They were ready to send humans to the moon. The mission was called Apollo 11. It was the most important mission in human history. If it failed, it would be a global disaster. But if it succeeded, it would change the world forever. Now let me take you inside that mission. I will tell you every small detail step by step, so it feels like you are experiencing it yourself. NASA selected 3 brave astronauts for this dangerous mission. First, there was Neil Armstrong, the commander of the mission. He was a very experienced pilot, and he would be the first human to walk on the moon. Second, there was Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot. He would be the second person to walk on the moon. And third, there was Michael Collins, the command module pilot. His important job was to stay in the main spacecraft and orbit around the moon while the other 2 astronauts landed. They trained for years for this one mission. They practiced wearing the heavy, bulky spacesuits. They learned how to walk in low gravity. They even practiced simple things like eating and drinking in space. They knew that if anything went wrong, they might never come back to Earth. But they were ready. To reach the moon, they needed an incredibly powerful rocket. The rocket they used was called the Saturn V. It was the biggest and most powerful rocket ever built. It was 110 meters tall, which is taller than a 36-story building. It weighed 2.8 million kilograms, heavier than 400 elephants. When it launched, it produced 7.6 million pounds of thrust, which is strong enough to lift a small city into the sky. This was the machine that would carry Apollo 11 to the moon. The launch site was at Cape Kennedy in Florida, USA. On July 16, 1969, early in the morning, thousands of people gathered nearby to watch. Millions more people all around the world were watching on their televisions. Everyone was excited, nervous, and a little bit scared. At exactly 9:32 in the morning, the countdown began. 10, 9, 8, 7. The astronauts were inside the spacecraft, sitting tightly in their seats. 6, 5, 4. The engines started to rumble, and the ground began to shake like an earthquake. 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. With a massive explosion of fire and smoke, the Saturn V rocket lifted off the ground. It was so powerful that the entire sky was filled with bright flames and thick clouds of smoke. The rocket rose higher and higher, leaving Earth's atmosphere behind. Inside the spacecraft, the astronauts felt a huge force pushing them back into their seats. In just 12 minutes, they reached space. Once they were in space, they had to travel for 384,000 kilometers to reach the moon. This journey took about 3 days. Can you imagine that? For 3 days, they floated inside their small spacecraft, watching the beautiful blue Earth get smaller and smaller behind them. Inside the spacecraft, their life was very different. They ate freeze-dried food like dried soup and powdered juice. They slept in special sleeping bags that were attached to the walls because with no gravity, they would just float around. They used a tiny bathroom, which was just a small tube with suction. They were weightless, floating inside their capsule, just like astronauts in a science fiction movie. Outside their window space was completely black. There was no air, no sound, just an endless silent darkness. Finally, after 3 long days of travel, they reached the moon. Now, the most dangerous part of the entire mission was about to begin, the moon landing. To land on the moon, the astronauts used a special small spacecraft called the Lunar Module, or LM. They gave it a name, the Eagle. It was shaped a bit like a giant insect with 4 thin legs. The main spacecraft, called Columbia, stayed in orbit around the moon with Michael Collins inside. The Eagle separated from Columbia and started to go down, down, down toward the moon's surface. Inside the Eagle, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were controlling everything. This part of the mission was incredibly dangerous. If they landed too fast, they would crash. If they landed in the wrong place, a place with big rocks or a deep crater, they could get stuck. If the engine failed, they would be trapped on the moon forever. It was a situation of life or death. As the Eagle descended, the astronauts could see the gray, dusty surface of the moon getting closer and closer. But suddenly, a problem. The computer on board started flashing error messages. Alarms started ringing. Buzz Aldrin quickly checked the system. The computer was overloaded. It was trying to do too many things at once. Should they continue the landing, or should they cancel the mission and go back? It was a terrifying moment. NASA's Mission Control, all the way back in Houston, Texas, had to make a quick decision. A voice from Houston told them, "Ignore the error. Continue with the landing." Armstrong decided to take control of the spacecraft manually. He was now flying it himself. As they got even closer, he saw that their planned landing spot was covered in big rocks. It was too dangerous. Armstrong had to quickly steer the Eagle to a new, safer place. But fuel was running out. 30 seconds of fuel left, a voice from Mission Control warned them. If they didn't land soon, they would run out of fuel and crash. 20 seconds. The tension was unbelievable. 10 seconds left. Then suddenly a light came on. Contact light. The Eagle's legs had touched the surface. They had landed safely. It was 4:17 p.m. USA time. Armstrong's calm voice spoke the historic words over the radio. "Houston Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Around the world, people erupted in celebration. They were crying, cheering, and hugging each other. But the mission wasn't over yet. Now it was time for the most historic moment of all, the first human step on the moon. What Armstrong and Aldrin faced at that moment was enormous. The computer was failing, and the landing site was dangerous. Armstrong had to make a split-second decision: trust his own skill as a pilot or abort the mission. What do you think you would have done in that moment? It's a huge responsibility. Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read what you think. The world was watching. This was it. The moment that millions of people had been waiting for. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were on the moon inside their lunar module. But they couldn't just step outside yet. There was still a lot of work to do before they could make history. Inside the small cramped space of the lunar module, Armstrong and Aldrin checked all the systems again and again. Was the spacecraft stable on the moon's surface? Was there enough oxygen inside their spacesuits? Was everything working properly? They had to be 100% sure, because one small mistake could mean disaster. NASA had planned for them to rest for a few hours before stepping outside, but Armstrong and Aldrin were too excited to sleep. Can you imagine? They were the first humans to ever be on another world. How could anyone sleep at a time like that? So after getting approval from Mission Control in Houston, they decided to go out early. Before stepping outside, they had to put on their spacesuits properly. These were not ordinary clothes. Each suit weighed about 82 kilograms on Earth. But on the moon, because the gravity is much weaker, it only felt like about 14 kilograms. The suit had a special backpack that gave them oxygen to breathe. It had a gold-covered visor to protect their eyes from the bright sun. It had thick gloves and boots to protect them from the moon's sharp rocks. Every small detail had to be perfect. If there was a tiny hole in the suit, they could die instantly because there is no air on the moon. It took them hours to get everything ready. Finally, Armstrong and Aldrin were set. It was time. Armstrong moved slowly toward the hatch, which is the door of the lunar module. He pressed a few buttons. With a soft hissing sound, the hatch opened. The surface of the moon was right there in front of him. He started climbing down the ladder. Outside, the moon was completely silent. There was no wind, no sound, nothing at all. The ground looked dusty and gray. Armstrong slowly moved down the ladder one step at a time. Then, at exactly 10:56 p.m. USA time, on July 20th, 1969, Armstrong placed one foot on the moon's surface, and he spoke the most famous words in history. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. People all around the world held their breath. 6 to 50 million people were watching on their televisions. Some people cried with joy. Others clapped and cheered. This was the first time a human had ever stepped on another world. Armstrong took his first few steps very carefully. Because the moon's gravity is 6 times weaker than Earth's, his steps felt light and bouncy. Every time he moved, dust floated up around his feet, but it fell straight back down because there was no air to carry it. He said the surface felt like powdery sand. It was soft in some places, but firm in others. Everything looked gray and lifeless. There were no plants, no water, no sounds, just an endless, empty land. After a few minutes, Buzz Aldrin climbed down the ladder and joined Armstrong on the surface. His first words were, "Magnificent desolation." What did he mean, magnificent? Because the view was absolutely amazing. The Earth looked like a small, beautiful blue and white marble in the black sky. Desolation, because the moon was completely empty and lonely. Now there were 2 humans on the moon. The next important thing they had to do was plant the American flag. This was not as easy as it sounds because there is no wind on the moon. A normal flag would not wave like it does on Earth. So NASA had prepared a special flag with a metal rod inside it to keep it open. Armstrong and Aldrin pushed the flagpole into the ground, but they found another problem. The moon's surface was harder than they expected. The flag wouldn't go in very far. They struggled for a bit and finally got it deep enough to stand. When they let go, the flag seemed to move a little. This made some people think the moon landing was fake, but actually the flag was just moving because of the astronauts' hands, not because of any wind. Now here is something you might not believe. Back on Earth, President Richard Nixon had prepared two different speeches. One speech was for success to be read if the astronauts returned safely. The other was a speech for failure to be read if they got stuck on the moon and died. Yes, NASA knew there was a real chance that Armstrong and Aldrin might never come back. If that happened, Nixon would have to announce their deaths to the world. Luckily, he never had to read that speech. Instead, he made a historic phone call to the astronauts while they were on the moon. His words were broadcasted around the world. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. It was the first long-distance phone call from the Earth to the moon, and it made history. Before they had to leave, Armstrong and Aldrin collected rock samples. They picked up 21.5 kilograms of moon rocks and soil. These rocks would be studied by scientists for decades. They also set up scientific experiments to study the temperature of the moon, the radiation from the sun, and the possibility of moonquakes. Every step they took was carefully planned. NASA wanted to learn as much as possible. After 2 hours and 31 minutes, it was time to leave. Armstrong and Aldrin climbed back into the lunar module. They closed the hatch and pressurized the cabin. They had completed the greatest mission in human history. Now they had one final challenge, returning safely to Earth. Armstrong and Aldrin had spent more than 21 hours on the moon. Now it was time to go home. But there was a big problem. If their lunar module, the Eagle, failed to take off from the moon's surface, they would be stuck there forever. NASA had no way to rescue them. Imagine how scary that must have been. As I told you, President Nixon even had a speech ready in case they died on the moon. So what did they do? Before leaving, they left a few things behind on the surface. They left the American flag. They left a plaque that said, "We came in peace for all mankind." They left their heavy lunar boots to make the module lighter for takeoff. And they left a small golden olive branch, which is a symbol of peace. Then they climbed back into the Eagle, closed the hatch, and prepared for liftoff. At 1:54 p.m. USA time on July 21, 1969, the Eagle's engine ignited. The top half of the module shot upward, leaving the bottom half behind on the moon. Aldrin later said it felt like being kicked in the back by a giant. As they went up, they saw the flag move slightly, blown by the force of the takeoff. For many years, people thought the flag was still standing on the moon. But guess what? In 2012, NASA confirmed that the flag had actually fallen over because of the powerful blast from the takeoff. As the Eagle approached Columbia, the main spacecraft, Armstrong and Aldrin, prepared for docking, which means connecting their two spaceships together. But then another problem. The docking mechanism wasn't working properly. If they couldn't connect, they would eventually run out of oxygen and die in space. Armstrong carefully adjusted the controls, and after a few very tense moments, they successfully docked. Now all three astronauts were together again inside Columbia. They closed the hatch and then let the Eagle go, leaving it to eventually crash back onto the moon. And now, with all three astronauts safely back together and heading for home, it feels like the danger is over. But the journey isn't finished yet. The return to Earth has its own terrifying challenges. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the final part of this incredible journey and the answers to all those mysteries we talked about at the beginning. After 2 more days of travel, they were getting close to Earth. But their biggest challenge was still ahead of them. They had to survive re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Here's why it was so dangerous. Their spacecraft was moving at 40,000 kilometers per hour. If they entered the atmosphere at the wrong angle, the spacecraft would burn up like a meteor. If they entered at an angle that was too shallow, They would bounce off the atmosphere and be lost in deep space forever. Do you know what protected them? A special heat shield on the bottom of their capsule. As they hit Earth's atmosphere, the temperature outside the spacecraft rose to an incredible 760 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than molten lava. But thanks to the heat shield, they survived. At 12:50 p.m. USA time on July 24, 1969, Apollo 11 splashed down safely into the Pacific Ocean. NASA had sent the USS Hornet, a huge Navy ship, to pick them up. Helicopters flew in to rescue them. The astronauts were alive. But there was one last surprise waiting for them. NASA was afraid that Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins might have brought back some kind of moon germs that could cause a deadly disease on Earth. So the moment they were pulled out of the ocean, they were put into quarantine for 21 days. They were kept inside a small metal room called the Mobile Quarantine Facility. Even President Nixon had to talk to them through a glass window. After 3 weeks, doctors confirmed that the astronauts were completely healthy. Finally, on August 13, 1969, they were released. And the celebrations began. When they came out of quarantine, they were greeted like heroes. In New York City, more than 4 million people came to celebrate them. They went on a world tour, visiting 24 countries in 45 days. They met kings, queens, presidents, and millions of fans. The whole world was celebrating their incredible achievement. After the mission, Neil Armstrong became a university professor and lived a quiet life. Buzz Aldrin became a strong supporter of space exploration. And Michael Collins worked in space programs and helped plan future missions. The Apollo program cost $25.4 billion back in the 1960s. Today, that is about $160 billion. That's more than the entire economy of some countries. Some people say that instead of spending so much money on space, the government should have helped poor people. They say it was just for politics, not for science, and that the money could have been used for hospitals' education and jobs. But let's look at the other side. What did we gain from Apollo? The money was not just thrown away. It was spent on people. It created hundreds of thousands of jobs in engineering, science, manufacturing, and research. And did you know that many of the technologies we use in our daily lives were developed because of the Apollo program? Here are just a few examples. GPS and satellite technology. Without Apollo, we wouldn't have accurate maps on our phones. Computers and microchips. The Apollo program made computers smaller and faster, which led to the modern smartphones we have today. Medical innovations. NASA developed better heart monitors, medical scanners, and even artificial limbs. And even cordless tools. Yes, your wireless vacuum cleaners and power drills come from NASA's research. It's amazing to think about, isn't it? That a mission to the moon gave us things like cordless tools and better medical scanners. Did any of these inventions surprise you? If you found this story inspiring and think a friend would enjoy it, please feel free to share it with them. It really helps our community grow. Apollo 11 wasn't just about space. It changed our daily lives in ways we don't even realize. Even today, some people refuse to believe that humans went to the moon. They say the flag looks like it's waving, but there's no wind on the moon. The truth is the flag had a metal rod to make it stand straight, and it only moved because the astronauts were adjusting it. They say there are no stars in the photos. The truth is, the camera settings were adjusted for the very bright moon surface, which made the dim stars in the background invisible. They say the shadows look strange, so it must be a Hollywood set. The truth is the moon's dusty surface reflects light in unusual ways, creating those strange shadows. And think about this, Russia. The USA's biggest enemy at the time never denied the moon landing. If it was fake, Wouldn't they have been the first to expose the truth? The evidence is clear. Thousands of people worked on the Apollo 11 mission. Keeping a secret that big would be impossible. We have moon rocks, and scientists have confirmed they are different from any rock on Earth. In 2009, a NASA satellite took new photos of the Apollo 11 landing site, and you can clearly see the remains of the Eagle and even the astronauts' footprints still there after all these years. Apollo 11 was real, and it remains one of the greatest achievements in human history. After the Apollo 17 mission in 1972, no human has ever gone back to the moon. Why? Well, it was too expensive. The USA was spending billions of dollars on the Vietnam War. Also, the Cold War started to end. The USA had already proven they could beat the Soviet Union to the moon, so they lost some of their interest. NASA's focus shifted to new projects like the Space Shuttle program and later on exploring Mars. But now, after more than 50 years, NASA is planning to go back. With the new Artemis program, astronauts will not just visit the moon, but they will stay there for months. They will build a base and even prepare for future missions to Mars. Maybe one day you will be watching on a screen as the first humans walk on Mars. In the end, Apollo 11 was more than just a moon mission. It showed the world that with courage and determination, nothing is impossible. It inspired millions of young people to become scientists, engineers, and astronauts. And it proved that humanity is capable of true greatness. Yes, it was expensive. Yes, it was dangerous. And yes, people still debate it. But in thousands of years, when people look back at our history, they won't just talk about wars or money. They will say that this was the moment when humans first left their home world and stepped onto another. And that is why Apollo 11 will always be remembered. And that's where our story concludes. This one was a real journey, wasn't it? I am so curious to hear your take on it all. What were your final thoughts? Do you have any lingering questions about why a character did what they did? Please leave all your opinions, theories, and questions below. I truly love reading them and building this conversation with all of you. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.